Hidden beneath the vast canopy is a lost world of the ancient Maya. Whole towns and cities vanished.
The bones found beneath the streets of modern Mexico are finally speaking, and they are telling a story that the establishment did not want to hear. For a long time, the origins of the Aztec people were seen as a local legend. But get this. The crazy part is that their DNA holds markers that stretch across the continent and back into a time of massive global changes.
I mentioned them briefly. I explored the Olmec mystery. It's considered to be the earliest high culture of Central America.
This is a key detail because it supports the idea of a lost chapter in human history. Basically, the science is catching up to the theories that were once called impossible and wild. Genetic truths from buried ruins. The study focused on remains found at a place called Tlatelolco, which was a massive market and religious center. By looking at the maternal lines in the DNA, researchers found that the population shifted in a huge way right after the empire started to grow. This means that people were not just staying in one spot. They were part of a massive, ancient movement that connects the heart of Mexico to the far reaches of the north. And get this. Some of these genetic markers go back 5,000 years. That is way older than the Aztec Empire itself. The crazy part is that this timeline lines up perfectly with what some researchers have been saying for a long time. They argue that there was a much older network of people and knowledge that existed long before the famous civilizations we know today. What most people do not realize is that these bones are like a hard drive filled with information that has been locked away for centuries. By using a process called ancient DNA sequencing, scientists can see exactly where a person's ancestors came from. In this new study, the results showed a mix of groups that traveled over 3,000 miles. If you look at the map, that is like walking from the top of the United States all the way down to Central America. These were not just small groups of hunters. These were organized migrations that were happening on a scale that is hard to imagine, and that is putting it lightly. The data suggests that the foundation of the Aztec world was built on a legacy that is thousands of years old. The researchers were shocked to see how much diversity was in the samples. It turns out that the Aztec capital was a melting pot of different genetic backgrounds. This is a key detail because it shows that the empire was much more connected to the rest of the world than we were told. Instead of a single group of people, the DNA reveals a web of connections that spans across deserts and mountains. See, the science is showing that these people were part of a much bigger story. This is where things start to get really interesting for people who follow the work of Graham Hancock. He has always claimed that ancient cultures were far more connected and advanced than we give them credit for. For starters, hands down, this is the most solid evidence we have ever had that the migration stories in the old Aztec codices were based on real ancient events. The DNA confirms that there was a massive influx of people from the north who brought their culture and language with them. But the timeline is what really changes the game. If these movements were happening 5,000 years ago, it means the roots of this civilization go back to a time when most people think everyone was just living in small caves. It opens up the possibility that there were advanced societies or organized groups long before the pyramids were even built. But there is still more to find in the dust of the old empire. Nahua bloodlines beyond the north. When you look at the history of the Aztec people, everything starts with a place called Aztlan. The legends say it was a land of white herons located somewhere far to the north. For a long time, historians thought this was just a myth or a nice story. But here's the catch. The new DNA evidence is making that myth look like a solid fact. By comparing the ancient bones to people living today, scientists found a direct link between the Aztec ancestors and tribes living in what is now the southwestern United States. This is a key detail because it proves that the migration was real and it covered a distance of over 1,500 miles. The crazy part is that this movement was not just a one-time thing. The DNA shows that gene flow was happening between northern Mexico and the American Southwest as far back as 5,200 years ago. That is a massive amount of time. To put that in perspective, that is long before the Roman Empire or even the height of ancient Egypt. Most people believe that large groups only moved when they started farming, but this DNA tells us that people were traveling long before they ever planted their first crop of corn. This is a key detail because it suggests that there was a reason for people to be moving across such huge distances so early in history. Nobody expected this to happen, but the data is showing that the Uto-Aztecan language family, which includes the language of the Aztecs, spread through the continent in a way that matches these genetic patterns. It means that the culture and the people were part of a vast network that was already well established thousands of years before the Spanish arrived. So here's the deal. If these people were already so organized and mobile 5,000 years ago, what else were they doing? This is exactly what Graham Hancock has been asking for decades. He believes that we are missing a huge chunk of human history that involves advanced travel and communication. And get this. The DNA also shows that these northern migrants did not just arrive in an empty valley, they met and mixed with the people who were already living there. This created a new, powerful culture that would eventually become the empire we know today. But the core markers remain. They show a clear path from the north that has been etched into the bones of every Aztec warrior. It is not that simple, though, because the deeper you go into the DNA, the more questions start to pop up about where those northern groups originally came from. What most people do not realize is that the ancestors of the Aztecs were part of a group that survived some of the most intense changes in the history of the world. They lived through the end of the last ice age and the massive shifts in the environment that followed. This is a key detail because it connects them to the very timeline that Graham Hancock focuses on. He argues that a global cataclysm about 12,000 years ago wiped out an advanced civilization, leaving only small groups to restart humanity. If the Aztec DNA shows such an ancient and stable lineage, it could be the evidence of those survivors moving and rebuilding. The science is starting to bridge the gap between myth and reality. For a long time, mainstream science laughed at the idea of lost civilizations or ancient global connections. But when the DNA shows people moving across thousands of miles and maintaining their identity for 5,000 years, the myth starts to look like a very organized history. It is a story of survival and intelligence that goes way beyond what is written in the standard school books. The more we look at these bones, the more we see a map of a world that we are only just beginning to understand. But a darker secret might be hiding in the genetic code of the sacrifices. Forbidden markers found under Mexico. One of the most intense parts of Aztec history is the Templo Mayor, the massive pyramid in the heart of their capital. This was a place of power, but it was also a place where thousands of people lost their lives in ceremonies. Scientists have recently been able to study the DNA of the people found at this site, and the results are truly bizarre. You'd expect the people there to be from the local area, right? But here's the catch. The DNA reveals that many of the people found at the Templo Mayor came from very far away. Some were from the tropical coast, while others had genetic markers from the high mountains of the north. This is a key detail because it shows that the Aztec Empire was like a giant vacuum, pulling in people and resources from across the entire continent. But it also reveals something even more mysterious. Some of the genetic sequences found in these ancient remains show rare markers that are usually found in very different parts of the world. While most of the DNA is clearly Native American, there are tiny traces that some researchers say shouldn't be there according to the standard model. There are still many rumors in the air, but what many can confirm is that these anomalies are causing a lot of heated debates in the scientific community. These rare markers are exactly what Graham Hancock points to when he talks about ancient transoceanic travel. He suggests that people were crossing the oceans long before Christopher Columbus was even a thought. While mainstream scientists usually say these markers are just noise or mistakes in the data, the fact that they keep showing up in the most important Aztec sites is hard to ignore. The crazy part is that if even one of these markers is proven to be from an outside source, it would mean that the history of the world is completely different than we were told. It's not that simple, though. Most of the evidence still points to a very strong and consistent Native American lineage, but the diversity is what matters. It proves that the Aztecs weren't an isolated group. They were the peak of a very old and very connected system of human travel. If you have markers from 3,000 miles, 4,828 kilometers away showing up in a single temple, it tells you that the ancient world was just as connected as our world is today. What most people don't realize is that this level of organization requires a massive amount of knowledge about geography, navigation, and logistics. So here's the deal. Where did that knowledge come from? Did the Aztecs just figure it out on their own, or was it passed down from an even older source? This is the core of the mystery. Graham Hancock argues that the Aztecs, like the Egyptians and the Maya, were heirs to a much older civilization that possessed high-level technology and mapping skills. He believes that the stories of gods coming from the north or across the sea were actually stories of these survivors bringing knowledge back to the world. When we see DNA that shows such massive and ancient movement, his ideas start to sound less like fiction and more like a possibility. Basically, we're looking at a puzzle with half the pieces missing. We have the bones, we have the DNA, and we have the ruins. But the story that connects them all is still being written. Every time a new bone is scanned, the timeline gets pushed back further and the map gets bigger. We're finding that the ancient people were far more mobile and far more intelligent than we ever gave them credit for. The Aztec DNA is just the beginning of a much larger reveal about who we are and where we actually came from. Think about the sheer scale of this operation. The Aztecs were bringing people from the edges of the known world to the center of their universe. Some of these individuals traveled over 2,500 miles to reach the capital. That's like walking from New York to Los Angeles just to end up on a stone altar. But why? Why go through the trouble of transporting a specific person from a specific bloodline across such a distance? This leads to one of the wildest theories out there. Some researchers whisper that the Aztecs weren't just looking for laborers or sacrifices, they were looking for specific DNA. They were collecting genetic blueprints from every corner of the world. It's almost as if the Templo Mayor was a massive genetic library, and the rituals were a way to activate or return that energy to the earth. If you look at the skulls found in the Tzompantli or the skull rack, the variety is staggering. You see different head shapes, different dental patterns, and now different genetic codes. What do you think about these ancient DNA findings, and do you believe the secret history of the Aztecs proves Graham Hancock's theories? Like and subscribe for more mysteries.